So is that working? Well, the bot is slowly getting there. And let's go see whether that's working. Yeah, that's now connected. So is that working? It is. Oh. Hello everyone. Welcome to the Defense Investment Plan, a live, and I do mean this, a live review, if something's actually being published. A chat about what should be in there if it's not. Anyone gonna guess how much I was betting there wouldn't be anything in here? I have to admit, my presentation that I had written would have been completely honestly spoilt if they'd actually published anything. That's terrible to say, but it's the truth. It would have been spoilt. If they'd actually published anything, my presentation would have been spoilt. I would have had hardly anything to talk to you about. Well, no, I'd have just gone through it line by line, ripping it to pieces, because that's probably what's going to happen. And I mean that in a nicest way. That is probably what's going to happen, because, well, these things are the way it seems to be going to be. Thank you everyone for the hydrates, posted checks and everything. Hello to everyone on Twitch and YouTube. And the reason I'm keeping the screen up currently is because I'm putting on my t-shirt back on. Because I got gravy on it, and I had to clean it quickly. And so, it just, to make sure I wasn't late starting. And didn't give you all the show. Yeah. So, hello everybody. Hello. The Defense Investment Plan. So far, we are waiting over 18 months and still counting. And Cartoon Man, yes, you have summed it up correctly. If the government were competent, my presentation would be ruined. Luckily, banking on competent government has never seen you go wrong in the UK. Yeah, what can I say? This is going to be a fun one. Now, the thing is, this is a live video, and normally the symbol I have for a live, which happens, is that I have the bot live. Currently, the bot is failing to connect once again to Twitch Broadcaster. I'm not sure if it's getting the the topics from Twitch Broadcaster. I'm not sure what's going on, but since there was a bit of a trouble with the bot a few weeks ago, that's been an issue. So, that being said, I have spotted a few admins in the chat, and so I will ask the admins if they'll be very kind. I'm going to put the questions live thing up. It'd be very kind if the admins could, between themselves, sort out and copy and paste any questions to the Q&A in Brewships. And I'll do my normal thing of going through those questions at the Keyships point, at the Shameless Book Plug, and at the end. However, you might notice a chat of what to look for if not. And that means that I will be taking points from the chat. I will be looking at the chat the whole way through. I've got the combined chat, courtesy of Restream, up, so I can see both Twitch and YouTube together at the same time. So hopefully, I don't miss anything. Hopefully, it all works. But if I do miss something, just say. But the point is, if they're questions, i.e. they may or may not be the topic we're actually talking about now, put them in as a normal Q&A, and I'll get to them at those points which I normally get to questions. If they're a point to do with what I'm discussing at that point, please put in the chat, and I will bounce to it as fits within the timeline of me talking about those things. Now, so I hope you're all well and all enjoying yourselves. I hope you're in for a How do I put this politely? Let me check my PowerPoint to find how many are in the dip slides. Yes, there are 18 slides, of which 13 are pure content. 4 are adjustable content, and 5's definitely not content. Also, I should say at this point, the patron suggestions is live at the moment on those. So people who have suggestions for patron topics, yeah. Okay. Steve would like me to pin a comment on YouTube. Apparently questions are now working on YouTube. So the Q&A bot is working, but it's not taking them to the brew ship spot. So we'll see what happens. But yes, would shameless book plug. Now, why am I dealing with the admin at the beginning rather than halfway through at the end? Because this is going to be a live chat, and those are always fun. Okay? Those are always things which come up, and it's worthwhile explaining them at the beginning, so that everyone knows roughly what we're doing, and also knows that we will sort of be there. Everyone will get listened to. Questions are not working at all on Twitch, but they are working sort of on YouTube. The dip will be delivered at pace. I doubt that. So, it's yet to be published, and this is the first slide, which if they'd actually published a defense investment plan, I would be in trouble with. I'd be really in trouble with this slide, because let's be honest, this slide is 100% dependent upon them not having published it yet. Because it lays out a logic for what they should be actually be doing, and we all know the logic will not come back as anything like this. But I'm going to put through this logic, and I'm going to explain it. If I was doing a defense investment plan, I would be grouping around 5 core principles. 1. Indigenous organic capability to the force structure. Okay, what do these words mean? Indigenous means it's built in the UK, or near enough. It is a UK product. It is a UK system which we can control the construction of, scale up as we need, guarantee our supply of it. Organic. Now, organic, when we're talking about armed force structures, is an interesting phraseology, because people often find it weird when it comes up, but let me explain it. Organic means that a force can carry out operations on their own, i.e. organically. They do not depend upon the outside stimuli of other nations. So basically, the idea is to build an indigenous organic capability to the force structure. So basically making the British Armed Forces strategically independent and operationally independent, as much as they can be. Why is this important? Because, believe it or not, the more you are strategically and operationally independent, the more freedom of maneuver you have when it comes to politics and international relations. So the more freedom you have to be able to set your own terms and secure your own interests as you need to. That's what you're sort of looking at. And that's why when people are assessing things and comparing, America to China or all these nations, what they're really looking at is their indigenous organic capability to their force structures. That's the difference. Can they project power globally from their own capabilities? Yeah, well, that's a organic capability. Can they supply themselves independently of outsiders? Yep, that's indigenous capability. So indigenous organic capability is what you're looking for in terms of national security. Now, when we start talking about that in terms of European nations, there is often a big movement for European nations to have it as a European goal. And the idea is that Europe is such a closely intertwined group of nations, even those not within the European Union, that they will always support each other and always work with each other. The trouble is, historically, this has been shown to be false on many occasions. Okay? They will help and support each other, yes. But sometimes their national interests, their foreign policies do not align. Sometimes one nation goes, well, no, I don't want to support war, and I don't think me supplying these assets is viable for you. If we consider the good example is the Eurofighter program. Currently, France and Germany have dropped out of their next generation fighter program, so everyone's talking about, will France or Germany join the GCAP? And which is the Anglo-Italian-Japanese program. And basically, one of the issues when we're getting into this, that with Germany joining, is Germany sometimes goes, no, we don't want to support operations there, so our components won't go there, because it's against our principled foreign policy, which is fine. That's their right as an independent nation. And there are already reasons why France and Germany's program actually broke up, is because of the issues they were having deciding who was going to get to do what. And something's happened to YouTube. I have no idea what, but something's happened to YouTube. It's always fun when there are issues with YouTube. What's today's issues with YouTube? Or is it OBS complaining about YouTube? Is it YouTube or is it OBS? Sending data. And hopefully that's all working now. Is YouTube now working? Yes, it is. So that's a reality you have to deal with. You have to think about that one. Next point. Needs to have the necessary infrastructure as part of the build. This is something Britain is absolutely amazingly good at. Going down we're going to develop this really cool thing. What about the infrastructure to support it? That'll happen later. And there's a reason that we've got in that habit. Because, see, World War I and World War II left us with so much infrastructure. So much stuff. That infrastructure building as part of a procurement program has got politically disconnected from procurement. And we still haven't managed to wed it back to it. We're going to be getting into this today, but I am seriously... There is a reason why almost every second slide in this video today is going to include the phrase infrastructure. Three, needs to reflect Britain's strategic needs. Are we buying it because it is cool on a picture and a poster and with a minister standing in front of it, or because we actually need it? I'm sorry, if it's not the latter, then I don't care how pretty your face looks in that picture, it ain't getting bought. That's it. I don't care. You don't need... If you don't need it, you don't buy it. Okay, if it doesn't fit what Britain actually needs, then there is no economic case which can be made for it. 4. Should provide a return on investment including foreign sales. Return on investment including foreign sales. Now, return on investment is calculated by two things. Usability by the British Armed Forces, i.e. how useful it's going to be, how much of an operational capability is it filling, how much of a need is it filling, and foreign sales. Can we sell this to a lot of people abroad? We're talking actually the finished product, or the design, or the investment. What can we sell? Because we have to make some money. It's an investment plan. You do not invest to get nothing out of it. You invest to grow capability and grow profits. That's what investment is about. And if they're going to use economic terms for this, and they're going to split this off from the regular defense budget, then by golly, I'm going to make sure they are held to those economic terms and investment plans. And 5. Where it does tie in with allies, provide for reciprocation. I.e., where we decide it is better to buy something from an ally than to build it ourselves. Where we decide it is better to support their indigenous capability rather than own, then they must be willing to provide equal support for our indigenous capabilities in other areas. I.e., should we buy X from them, they will be buying Y from us. If they are not prepared to buy Y from us, if there is no quid pro quo going on, then we ain't buying from them. Now, you might be thinking, Alex, that's an incredibly parochial and limiting view, and it is in some ways. But it's also an economically and technologically sensible point of view. Because any scenario where you are supporting someone else's indigenous capability against your own, then at a certain point you're probably not going to have the ability to recover that indigenous capability. So you're going to become dependent upon them. And if you're going to be dependent on them, you need them to be dependent upon you. Otherwise, you're in a very unequal relationship. And that's a bad place to be when we're talking about defense and security. It's a very bad place to be when we're talking about defense and security. Don't worry, if you can't don't post questions in Discord, post them in the chat and the admins will get them. So, yeah, that's the starting off point. Now, I was tempted to make it 10 criteria, I was tempted to make it 15. I could think of actually about 30 different criteria I could have worded into this. But I remembered something which was taught to me by a very old Royal Marine Sergeant a very long time ago. Which was, anything you can sum down to the number of digits you have on a hand. And to be fair, this gentleman actually only had... What was I missing? It was this one which was missing. So he had his hand was this. His would have been 4, mine was 5. Makes life a lot easier for people to remember. That's useful. Now, I see there's already people getting into the cheap versus basic debate. Yeah, cheap versus basic. Different things. Cheap looks like it has all the capabilities, but bought at half the price, which will break in half the time. Basic usually lasts. If you want a good example of basic versus cheap that I use on a regular basis, let's see if I can find one. Yeah, there it is. So, I'm not using one today because I'm wearing tracky bottoms. But this is my belts. The belts I always wear. They are very basic. They are literally this sort of system. Now, the thing is about these belts, the thing that makes you really like them, they're based off an armed forces system, and they are, I do admit, they're not that expensive. But unlike the cheap plastic ones you can get, these belts can have a close enough pull that I can thread them through like this. And I can use it as a tourniquet. So it's a basic thing to carry on me. But it's very useful should I need to use a tourniquet on someone. Should I need to carry out that level of first aid, I've always got something on me which can be used for it. Even though I don't need a belt to hold up most of my trousers these days because I fit them quite well. Now, the thing is, there are people who get versions of this belt which have fancy, and I'm talking very, very fancy buckles on them. What I have found is every time you look at the ones which have the fancy buckles, they look really cool, but they can't actually get you close enough to have a tourniquet on them. So there you go. That is basic. It works. Doesn't have any flashy gimmicks. It doesn't look cool. It doesn't go neon. It doesn't... I think there's one which flaps out, and it's a bottle opener. Now, myself, I wouldn't like to be opening a bottle about there, because I don't know about everyone else where they position their belt, but that could hurt if you go wrong. It could hurt a lot. Honestly. If you open the bottle wrong and you get a load of glass out everywhere, that could hurt a lot. So I personally wouldn't go that. But I'm happy with the basic one. It works. That's basic. So let's start off with the first area, which people are going to talk about. Uncrewed aviation assets. Now, admittedly, I'd love to talk about the work of 700X, based out of Colaborative. They are a very cool squadron. If you want to look up what they're doing, the Royal Navy website helpfully tells you zilch, basically. It's the most minimalist website known to mankind. Typical Royal Navy whenever it comes to telling everyone what it's doing and cool stuff. We've got a website which says we have a unit that exists. Yeah. Is that too much information? Probably, but we've got it there. We'll leave it. But Britain has formed with uncrewed aviation assets. Watchkeeper, which is pictured here, is a very good example. It is one of the longest, most torturous development programs known to mankind. When it was first started, it looked really good. And when it finally delivered, it's fairly capable. But ever since it's been in the service, the British government keep wanting to sell it off and get rid of it. They keep saying there's better things. And there probably are. There probably are better ones. But here's the thing. This is the one you spend a huge amount of money developing painstakingly for your own frigging needs. And now you want to get rid of it and replace it with something else. If you want a classic example of why we are not getting much bang for our buck in UK spending, it's not because the actual equipment is bad. It's because just as soon as we bloody well bought it, excuse the French, we decide we want to get rid of it and buy something else. It was supposed to be in service till 2042. They keep trying to say it's going to be out in 2027, 2028. It's going to be sold off and out of service. It's just... This is the problem, okay? British procurement... Everyone goes, British procurement's broken. No, we procure quite well. We just... Once we procured it, we then cut it and procure something else to do the same job. And I don't know why. I don't know what drug we are on that makes us do this, because it is certainly no symptom of anything known to mankind. I know people who sometimes try to describe it as Britain has procurement ADHD. No, this is not procurement ADHD. Procurement ADHD does not do this. I know many people who have ADHD. Not one of them spends ages buying something, builds it, and then goes, you know what, I'll get rid of it and buy something which does the exact same job. Not one of them. They go on to a new thing to buy and procure. They don't procure something to do the same job. Sorry. No, lads, no, we'll just buy the next thing as well. Yeah. The thing is, with ADHD, usually goes with... There's quite a lot of ADHD which goes with hoarderism. They do not sell the stuff off. Oh, but no. Look, the thing is, drones are coming in and uncrewed aviation assets are coming in. And they're going to be taking on a lot of the operational roles in terms of assistance of operations. They're going to be taking on a lot of the duties. They're going to be providing a lot of the wingmen, a lot of the extra force, extra numbers that you need. Because, frankly, we aren't buying enough of crewed aircraft. Now, again, we'll be talking about that when we get to the crewed aircraft point, because there are some interesting ideas out there, including one from Gareth the Brit, which I'm going to shamelessly nick. But the thing is, we have to also make use of the systems we've got. And we have to ask ourselves sometimes whether buying a whole new system is better than buying a few more of an existing system we already have. And why am I saying this? Because the problem for the UK is, and this is the one for the whole of Europe at the moment when we're talking about it, is satellite infrastructure. Now, I realise when we start talking about the modern trench warfare that's going on in Ukraine at the moment, people talk about fibre optic cables strewn across trees and forests like they're, spiders' webs and all sorts of things. And there are some areas where that's possible, where you have a sufficiently, I would say, immobile front line that you can set up the ground stations and the positions where you can spool out the fibre optics and where you can run the support for that. But in a more fluid, more global scenario, you're going to have problems with infrastructure in terms of communications. And even when you talk about all those fibre optic cables, if anyone was actually looking at the current, and I have a strict rule in this channel, I only use publicly published information. I don't use all the information you can get from websites which publish stuff which is not supposed to be publicly available. But if you happen to wander on some of those websites, again, I'm not going to suggest any specific ones, but maybe some of the ones to do with data bandwidth usage on commercial and commercial communications satellites in the European area, you will find that they are currently at max capacity quite often. And there is a shortage of satellites. And that's with there not being any scenario where people are actively interfering with those satellites at the moment. Despite recent maneuvers of old Russian satellites and all these things, there has been nothing which has been done to actually actively interfere in those satellites' operations. Britain, believe it or not, has multiple spaceports. If we are going to invest in drones, if we are going to invest in these in the future, we should also be investing in spaceports and an ability to launch our own satellites. This would make sense. As defence investment and for British economic growth, I would say investing in spaceports would be a pretty significant thing. Now, there might be people who disagree with me in the chat, and I can understand why. You might be going, Alex, this is a bit of a long jump for defence investment. Surely this should be coming from general government investment. But the trouble is there isn't a general government investment at the moment, and this is a strategic issue. So it's defence investment. Because it doesn't matter whether it's crewed assets or uncrewed assets, whether it's aviation drones, maritime drones, anything, you need to be able to invest in these things. Now, there is a link down below to the report where I got this diagram for, and I should say that a lot of these spaceports are in a state of unsureness, because guess what? The government decided that instead of investing in one, they'd set out a regulatory framework where anyone can become one should other people want to put the money in. Now, The thing is, the reality is, it's not going to happen without government investment. It's too expensive. It's too much infrastructure. It's too much based on a 50 to 100 year payoff. Now, this would mean, to my mind, that if I was the government, I would set up a national spaceport authority along the lines of probably National Rail, and would go, okay, we will run the infrastructure, but we will charge you for its usage. And it'll be open to any company that wants to use it. If SpaceX wants to roll in, if Blue Sky, or Blue Origin, whatever the frigate it is, any of them want to roll and use it, they can roll in and use it. But they have to sign a 10-year plan that they're going to be using it for. And they have to actually be using it during those 10 years. And we are going to give priority to people who build their systems in the UK. But you've got to do that to have it work out, because you can't be dependent upon drones, dependent upon systems which depend upon communication for their command and control, and not have the infrastructure for it. And I know there are people who go, well, what about when we have the AI-powered drones? Well, they're not going to be powered for starters. I don't know where the AI-powered comes from. AI is going to require huge amounts of power, because it'll require a huge amount of computing power, so expect those drones to be fairly frigating big. But also, and this is the other big thing, even if you are talking about using a logarithmic AI system, which is basically run and mimicked on something else, it's still going to require a lot of power for them, all the data, the sensors and systems it's going to have to run. You're not going to want that to be completely independent. You're going to be wanting to watch that, just in case someone hacks your computerized killing machine. I'm just saying here, the thing is, yes, the Cylons are not perhaps the best example of what can happen when computers go wrong, and the Terminator movies might have gone a little bit interesting in terms of their actual examination of physics. But the point is, it is not beyond the wit of man, or the wit of humanity as a whole, to envisage a future where such machines could turn on us. Or if we want to quote another particularly interesting movie series and book series, when it became a time for for humanity to outsource its thinking to machines, it soon found itself enslaved by the people who controlled the machines. This is a problem. Okay? You need to be able to communicate, you need to have the ability to deal with them, and that ability itself is going to be something you're going to have to worry about, because if you have the ability to communicate with them, that means someone else theoretically has the ability to hack that ability to communicate with them, and then you have trouble. So you need to be able to watch these things. Now, Flowing Fiber, I think you put in what I would call a question, not a point, so can someone grab that from YouTube, or can they show you how to put that in as a Q&A? Because that's a question which I'll happily get to. We'll be talking about that sort of thing anyway as we go on, but it makes sense as a question. So, the thing is, I like drones. I do. I think they are going to be very useful tools. But I think they are also something which requires us to invest in the infrastructure behind them. And this is not just the factories of building the drones. Every time I see this discussed, every time I see drones discuss the topic, people go, how many drones are we building? Here's the question I want to ask. How many drones do we have the ability to actually control? How do we have command and control? That works fine, flowing fiber. How many, that's the question. How many drones do we actually have the ability to control in the air? How many operators do we have? How much is our bandwidth? How many can we actually coordinate? Because there is no point in having 10,000 drones but only being able to control 10 at a time. That sounds probably mildly insane, but it's the reality. There is no point, there is absolutely no point in having these assets if you can't use them. And yes, you can't use all 10,000 at a time, no, because then you'll... If you only have 10,000 drones, you can use them all at a time, then that's great, but that's going to be a single salvo, and then you're going to be out. That's a problem. Then if you can control 10,000, then you probably need to have a stockpile of at least 1 million. That'll even still only provide you for 100 rounds, but you know, at least you can fire off 100 salvos. So, crewed warships and submarines. Okay. Here is the thing. I'm gonna sound like a typical naval person here, but I thought I might as well get this over and done with. I'm getting through everyone, and don't worry, there are roughly 4 slides for each branch of the armed forces. So, do not worry, they're all covered. But, broadly speaking, whether we're talking Type 31, Type 26, AUKUS, anything like that, broadly speaking, buyers, in terms of foreign military sales, are more interested in active production lines than in theoretical models. And if we want to improve the ability of the Type 31 to sell abroad, we have to order the Type 32, or the Batch 2 Type 31s. I don't care what we frigating call it. I really don't. I just care we order the frigates. And the reason I say that is because that is the cheapest way to keep that production line going. And keeping that production line going provides opportunity for sales. There are a lot of nations who are going to be looking for modern ships of that size, of that scope and capability in the next few years. The ability to adapt to the hull. This is the thing. The Type 31 really is a wonderful hull for mucking around with. If you want to turn it into a drone coordination ship, if you want to turn it into a mine warfare mothership, if you want to turn it into any of those things, you can very easily do it because it is a big enough and flexible enough design to do so. It was designed from the beginning to have that flexibility. It has that flexibility. The Type 26 is a premier anti-submarine warfare asset. It's got other adaptations viable, but it is there. In terms of the AUKUS and the submarines, again, once the production line is going, there are probably going to be others who start considering getting involved in the AUKUS project, and there are others who are going to consider it. Because the trouble is for SSKs, is as good as they are, as glorious as they are, they have a ceiling. It is range and time on operations. Time out at sea. They are not infinite when it comes to fuel supply. There is no infinite fuel for them. Added to that, the fact is, when you're dealing with a nuclear boat, you're usually building something that's big enough, which is bigger anyway, so that will tend to carry also, as a greater percentage of its hull, have more space for food supplies. Now, admittedly, it will require a larger crew, but it can operate usually for longer at sea. Why does that matter? Because, let's be honest, both are having to return home if they run out of torpedoes. Neither of them can really be replenished at sea. So, why does it matter their ability to operate for a long time out at sea? Because the vast majority of the work that the boats do, whether they are SSKs or SSNs, is peacetime intelligence gathering. The vast majority of the work they do is sitting and listening and trying to figure out what everyone else is doing. The vast majority of what they do is peacetime patrols where they are trying to find out what is going on in the world. That is what they do most of their lives. And again, this is the same for surface warships. Most of their lives are peacetime exercises and the presence mission. So if your ship can't do those, then frankly it's not much use. And those are usually the things which come last in anyone's analysis of them and any thought about their procurement is, hang on, we're building this excellent warship. Great. Can it do anything for us in peacetime? Why does that matter? Because it's going to spend most of its life in peace. Think about it. Type 45s have recently been involved in some actions. Recently. Were all Type 45s involved? No. The vast majority of the British Type 45 class destroyers have done global presence missions, did conflict management missions, and peacetime exercises. That is the vast majority of their life. And they're actually quite good at that, because some thought was actually put in their design to think about that. But the thing is, that is not always the case. And you can really see this when you start to look at what I'm going to next talk about. The infrastructure. Because here is the dirty, little, nasty secret that everyone keeps forgetting every time they talk about ship availability and ship maintenance in Britain. That we haven't got enough dry docks. And let me clarify that, because people are going to point out and go, well, Alex, on the map, there's this dry dock and this dry dock which aren't being used. Yes. When was the last time they had any money invested in repairing their lining, their pumps, their gates, and making them suitable to still be able to be used? Oh, they haven't for decades? Well, it's not really a dry dock at that point. It's just a pile of concrete in a shape which looks like a dry dock. Now, the thing is, here is the interesting thing. We've known for about the last 20 years that the issues were going to come with submarine availability. Believe it or not, there are very few people who are involved in UK naval affairs who are surprised by the current shortage in availability of submarines we have. I mean, really, virtually none of us are. The Royal Navy has been preparing for it for years. Do you know why? Because the Royal Navy's been requesting dry docks for years. There are 2 links below to 2 articles on dry docks. Currently, they haven't been ordered yet. They haven't been invested in. They've been known and listed as being needed for at least the last 5 years, in terms of officially according to the government. They were asked for about 25 years ago. So about 2000 was when the Navy started saying, we're going to need some soon because we're going to have some trouble with our maintenance if we don't have them. There's only so long we can do this for. And they need 2. They need 2 floating dry docks. And so far, Project Euston hasn't produced anything, apart from a whole load of complaints about where they shouldn't be built. Lots of unions go, they should not be built abroad. Okay, that's fine. I would prefer them to be built in the UK too. Okay, which shipyard wants to build them? Please, if anyone wants to do a Google search now and tell me which shipyard in the UK has petitioned for the right to build or petitioned for the business of building these dry docks, please come forward and tell me. Because it's kind of like the tug issue. I would prefer Britain to be buying its tugs for its navy from a British shipyard. However, no British shipyard put forward for them. So in the end it goes to Damon, a Dutch firm. They're not bad tugs either. They're one of the best tug builders in the world. But here is the problem. We are supposed to be building this stuff in the UK. So here, let me explain something. If you want them built in the UK, someone needs to want to build them in the UK. Which probably means you need to put the price up enough they're prepared to pay them. Because for someone in the UK, a yard, they're probably going to be treated as one-off specials that they build, not as something which is going to be an ongoing production that they do. And whilst that would suggest that Camel Lairds or Harland and Wolff could do it, Harland and Wolff are currently busy with the solid storeships. Although, seeing as we can't make up our minds, we're going to be buying 3 or 2 of those at the moment, and that's another thing that is part of this discussion. That's fun. Let me let you in on a clue. We probably need 3 solid storeships. We do. We're probably going to need more than 3, but 3 is a good start. And so would be, another 4 or so tankers. We probably need more than we are getting. Because the reason we were getting so few was it was the wars of choice doctrine. So we would generate our forces when we needed to fight wars when we chose to. Which is a great thing of saying that the Prime Minister thinks he's going to have the power to literally ring him and go, I fancy a war today. The reality has proved that that is a false assumption. That the idea that because the Cold War ended and the NATO and the West supposedly won it, and they probably did, that wars were no longer going to be fought unless the powerful nations chose to fight them, has proven to be absolute and total codswallop. I think we can all agree that. This idea cropped up in the 1990s. I would hope by the 2020s there is no one still adhering to it who is in a position of power. Here is the problem, though. We're still procuring as if that is the case. Because most of the procurement ideas, which have been rehashed and rehashed and rehashed over the last 30, 40 years, have not been actually not been properly revised, because it takes so long for them to get through to a point to which the consensus agrees with them being done, they don't think. The other example I give is this. Why are we building only 2 floating dry docks? We need them for surface ships as well. We don't have enough for the surface ships. And having 3 or 4 floating dry docks wandering around the UK that can be positioned where we need them would be kind of useful things to have. Yes, 2 sitting in Faz Lane, really useful to submarines. Have another couple sitting floating where we need them in, let's say, Plymouth, or in Gibraltar, or in Singapore, or in the Falklands, or where we need them in the world. We can take them. And if we want to use them for commercial projects at the same time, that's fine. Again, kind of like the space boards. Establish a national dry docks board. Have the dry docks run by this sort of organisation, and the purpose is, the Navy gets first dibs, but if the Navy's not using them, and a civilian yard wants to use them, that's fine. I'm not going to get too much into the politics of Harland and Wolff, but the point is about Harland and Wolff, and it's worthwhile considering, is that there is a whole debate. There are conventions about what happens to national debt which has been accrued by portions of nations when it changes nations. And the trouble is the amount of national debt which goes with Northern Ireland is sufficient enough that Ireland is not really keen on that idea. They'd like that debt paid down a fairly large chunk before they took it back. So, whilst there might be movements and people who want to do unification Ireland, the Irish government currently does not economically want to go down that route. Whatever they might say about the politics, they don't economically want to do it. And that might sound rather hubristic to say, but it is, having talked with people who are involved in the economics on both sides, that is a reality of it. 20, 30, 40 years, we're talking more like 50, 60 when the debt's paid down a fairly large chunk. Oh, the joys of debt transfer. And yes, no British government would sign off to keep the debt while they were getting rid of while territory and tax paying was going elsewhere. The laws of the debt are it transfers with the geographic location of the thing which is being claimed. That was established by, I think it was the Germans or the Prussians post Franco-Prussian War. Actually, it was the Prussians, because of who would take on the debt of something which would be invested in by France, and yeah, Prussia took it on. Floating dry docks are not rocket science. No, they're not rocket science, but the shipyards don't want to build them. They require space and time and build capacity. And they require a lot of... whilst not rocket science, they do require enough specialist technology and specialist studies that it's an investment to build them. And again, if you're only building 2. If your argument is we want to build 4 or 5 or 6, yeah, that's a different matter. Then you might actually have those yards be more interested in. Now, the thing is, and I do mean this in the nicest way, dry docks, infrastructure, auxiliaries, these are things which matter and it requires to be invested in, but they're not sexy. I know they're not sexy, but they are actually good returns on investment. Aidan Cloak, to answer that one, my book does have a hardcover version. It was the first edition. And if you can't find it, that's probably because it's all sorted up. But Pen and Sword still might have it. You might be able to get it off them. And how can it generate money? Well, again, if you're using your RFAs, your fleet auxiliaries, we're all currently loaning 2 out to NATO. We have basically hired them out to a private company, which is going to crew them and is going to offer them for services to NATO to support NATO operations. It's a big thing. It's a great thing because it's, it shows this can be done. It's going to support it. Yeah, that means they're basically NATO assets. They're no longer British assets. Which is a problem should we need them. Because we won't have first dibs on them. We don't get that. But the thing is, with floating dry docks and all these things, the fact is they are very useful, and there are allies who would probably go, oh, well, you have a spare one. Can we come and use yours? And you go, yes, you can pop over and use it. We have spare dry dock space. It's better to have spare dry dock space than not enough. So anyway, we're at the stage where they plan the meeting to have the meeting about what is going to be served at the organisational meeting for the dry docks. I don't think we're even that close, Senator Canero, but frankly, I wish we were closer. That being said, shameless book plug, and time for me to open up the questions. Thanks to admins for all the work you've been doing. Danko. Now, oh. There's I've got a whole massive email from a couple of people. Wow, I haven't logged into Discord often enough, have I? Okay. Bilge Pumps Q&A. Brew Ships Q&A. Okay. Wayne, I have no idea. War is a costly thing to wage. Comments on that line versus days. Yeah, and wars are costly things to wage. I come back to this on far too often in my videos, which is cheaper, to buy enough to be able to deter conflict, or to find yourself fighting an actual war. And into... Okay, into the questions for today. Okay, Steve Clarke. What's the minimum amount of information that will be included in a DI plan to make a viable statement? Defense. I'm probably covering the minimum amount of information. Because, you know, I haven't been getting into the weeds of details. And I've been avoiding that specifically. Because where you'll find a fighting will be over the weeds. It's where people go, oh, but I want this drone versus this drone versus this drone. And I'm going, I don't care. These are my criteria. If the drone which best fits this criteria is what I would buy. And it's not going to be an arguing case. It's not going to be an either or. It's what fits this criteria best. And the amount of times, especially this, the amount of common times you'll have is going, well, yes, but if we wait, this drone that's coming out in 2 years' time, which is currently only a graphic and a paper sketch of what we hope it'll do, is going to be better. So save your money and buy that. And my often thought is, well, if war breaks out 12 months from now, and I'm waiting for 2 years to start procuring that, so I won't have a viable force for about 3 years on that, I'm going to be snookered. Whereas if I buy what's available now, then I actually have a viable force for probably the next 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. Especially if I keep it up to date. Aaron, when it comes to shipbuilding export sales and the defense investment plan, would it perhaps be more prudent to have a basic ship, EV and UOPV, to secure rivers rather than a cheap one for exports? Well, the Type 31s are pretty much basic, but also it would be probably good to have a basic OPV structure as well. Or something that fills that sort of OPV, MCMV, mothership role quite well would be sensible to be going for, but again, we'd actually have to be ordering it, because I think and I really do stress this, you need a production line, you need an active production line for people to actually order these things. You need to be able to show something. Because the trouble is, whilst the British government seems happy to order vaporware, which is stuff which exists in theory but hasn't yet been built, quite a lot of governments are getting very, very allergic to ordering vaporware. They want to order something which is actually physical, they can touch and hold and use. What is the possibility to need defense spending increase or funded by bonds? If so, how would this work, and is there a precedent for war bonds in peacetime modern times? Not really war bonds in peacetime in modern times. Once you add those phrases together, not really. But building Navy bonds and the selling of bonds to fund the armed forces has been something which has happened, the British have done in peacetime quite regularly in the past. It's how they funded a lot of the upgrades in infrastructure in the various bits of peace in the Napoleonic eras when the government was willing to fund it. The Navy could issue bonds. And the bonds were often based on, I think there was some which were based on future income from, I think it was from captured ships. Yeah. I remember that. There were some bonds which were actually sold based on, you would get a return based on a percentage of every ship captured in a future conflict for over a set period. If there was any conflict in the next 10 years, you would get a percentage of each ship captured and, bought into service or sold. Yeah, those bonds were quite popular. You can't do that these days. But it's potentially going to be a bond scenario, because I can't see how else they're going to go about it, because they don't want to raise taxes. But also there are problems in that I think the trouble is, for Britain, it's the government within a government scenario. And the trouble is, I don't think the Treasury likes the idea of that much independence going to the armed forces in terms of Ministry of Defence, in terms of funding. And it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen. Murphy, what do you think of the Russian ship shooting a British yacht and your country's response? Doesn't look like you had the assets effective against a single frigate. Honestly, we had vessels watching it, but also there is an old thing of when your opponent's creating a mistake, don't interrupt them. They fired at a yacht. It was unarmed. Rules of the sea are on the yacht side. If they'd done more than firing, there were British assets in place watching. But it's a case of, at this moment, the Russians were the bad guys. They fired on a yacht. The British didn't do anything. Now, I might not agree with this government on many of their defence choices, but the thing is that fairly, quite straightforwardly, puts the Russians in the thing of they can't claim the British did anything provocative or the British were fighting back or the British were there at war with the Brits or anything like that. No, I won't. Now, saying that, the British would probably like to have had more units in the area. But as I've said before, the problem is, and I've talked about this already, we have managed to muck up our own infrastructure to the extent that we cannot generate these ships. Now, let me rephrase that. We mucked up the infrastructure based on the idea that the ships would keep being used in a predictable pattern. And unfortunately, we've had to do so many surges to deal with problems, and we don't have the infrastructure to deal with the surges because we sold it off. Or didn't invest in repairing it and maintaining it to the standard which it could be used. And that's our problem. Rajmodi, do modern underwater are modern underwater drones more dangerous than torpedoes or flying drones? And how much chance for intersections? There's quite a few chances for intersections, but again, it's a communications and command and control thing. And honestly, modern drones and underwater torpedoes, there isn't really that much difference when we're talking about the large ones. The smaller drones are not as dangerous as the torpedoes when they hit you, but the smaller drones are more of a problem, especially in the littorals, in areas where they can more easily hide and maneuver. But then it's one of those things of, look, one of the reasons why drones are perceived as such a problem is because we spent so much of our efforts focused on the high-tech problem, which is the hypersonic missile or the laser or these sort of weapons, and how we're going to deal with that in most of the first 20 years of the current century, that we kind of forgot how to deal with the cheap mass problem. And now we're stumbling ourselves going, what do we do against cheap mass? And there's people like me going, has anyone thought of the 76mm? Otto Malera and the Italian Navy are currently going, hello, have you seen our ships? We can deal with this. But everyone else is currently having a panic attack. Flying fibre. Would a small, less capable ASW frigate make sense for the future Royal Navy as a lower-end ASW asset to support the Type 26, similar to how the Type 23 rated to Type 22? It's probably going to be an uncrewed asset. It's probably going to be an uncrewed asset that operates with the Type 26s in terms of as a task group. As I've talked about before, my theory is the future of operations is the crewed ships are basically the center of each of their own uncrewed assets, with basically the crewed ships becoming the cruisers of the force, and the uncrewed assets becoming the sloops, destroyer escorts, frigates of the course. It's equivalent to World War II scenario. So where the frigates are the ASW cruisers, the destroyers are the air defense cruisers, and the sloops / corvettes / whatever you want to call them are the uncrewed assets. But it's going to be interesting to see what it comes through. Currently they are working on, I think it's, and I'm just going to skip. Well, actually, no, I'm going to skip. I'm just going to open up my own slide and go, hello. Just remember, I get my numbers correct. Type 92 is probably what we're looking at, but we'll see what comes with a Type 92. Gerag, GCAP will have a naval version considered? Nope. At the moment, it's got no naval version, so that's why it's unlikely to have the French in getting involved. KVG. Do we have a classification system from roach-sized spy drones to global hawks? Not really. People keep coming up with different ideas for them, but they're still working on it. Their drones are too varied at the moment for them to have a kind of classification system that really works. David Jobs Bloom. David Jobloom. Jobloom? Okay, yeah. Live debate here in Sweden. Oh, cool. Hello, Sweden. Right now, about whether the 4 newly ordered French FDO frigates are a sensible use of money. I kind of view them as a NATO tax, but was wondering what you thought. They are a sensible use of money because, in the nicest way, Sweden needs some of the defensive depth. Now they're part of NATO, they also need to think about working with NATO in terms of resupply to NATO. And that means they need to get not just use the Baltic as the defensive depth, they also need to use the Baltic as their ability to communicate. And the FDI frigates are in many ways part of that ability to actually project power across the Baltic and to communicate and resupply across the Baltic. So, i.e. the resupply routes to Finland across the sea, the resupply routes to Lithuania, the resupply routes to Latvia and Estonia, so the Baltic states. That's going to be an important part. Sweden is going to be an important logistics hub for the Baltic nations in NATO, and getting those supplies from Sweden to them is going to be critical to their security. So, yeah, that's part of it. It is a different scenario. Sweden's faced with a different scenario. They've been very much defense of Sweden for a long time, and they're very good at it. But now they've got to think about defense integration and how they operate as part of that NATO force structure. So you're right to an extent it's a NATO tax, but also it's sort of not so much a NATO tax as we're now part of NATO, we need to be able to do slightly more than we used to. Steve Clarke. Adding nations to AUKUS because the project is only nuclear for the main vessel, so this limits who we can sell this to being on Australia. However, is there a plan for a UAV and component we can sell? There are plans for that, but also, as AUKUS has shown, there is not as much of a limit of who we can sell nuclear to as we'd like to believe. We have expanded it to Australia. There are other nations who it could be expanded to, if you think about the criteria Australia fulfilled. How many nights ago? How many years were the warnings ignored? I've been talking about the need for dry dock space since I was 12. Because my dad had been complaining about it before then. So goodness knows. Enough to build several floating dry docks several times over. Which step will you take first? The infrastructure. Paul Amos. Do you know roughly how long it takes to build a floating dry dock? Would it be a matter of ordering 2 every 18 months or so? It's probably going to take longer than that, because we're going to have to do a design study and design them and build them. Or we can buy off the shelf, but let's be honest. I am currently I'm trying to find a new a new floating dry dock. I think the most recent one is Atlas, which was built for General Dynamics. Let me try and look at that Atlas. It was built by Bollinger. Yeah, you You'd have to look. Oh, that was a big. That's a big one. That's about the size actually you need. Um, it took them 6 years to build it. It was christened in October 2025. It was ordered in 2019. So yeah, I will put a link to this down below in the YouTube stream. You should find it down below in the dry dock section. Okay. So yeah, about 6 years. So how often would you want a we want 8 and we won't wait situation? Oh, I'm not going there. It'll get too passionate. It'll get too loud. Infrastructure from Lions. Isn't infrastructure spending also very good for keeping the money within the same country it's spent? Yes. Karen 15. Would concrete floating dry docks similar to the Mulberry Harbour castles be a cheaper way, but still suitable option for first lane? I think that's broadly speaking what they're talking about. They're going to have concrete in them, definitely. Friendly Seaman couldn't. Hello, Friendly Seaman. Couldn't an expanded fleet auxiliary be used in support of global humanitarian efforts? Yes. They are. That's traditionally what a lot of them, like the LSLs, were used for. Smiling Flip-Flops. What's your view on the Uruguay buying the Batch 1 River-class patrol vessels from the UK? They're going to be sold to someone, and that's the way the government's not going to pay to keep them going any longer. And it was either sell them to them or the Home Office, and the Home Office don't want them for the Border Force, so that's not going to happen. Nice. So are the two sides of political can we say it's 50% both sides? No, both are completely 100% default. I don't want them each thinking they're only half default. They're 100% default. Yeah, Kibby, couldn't floating dry docks be ordered on a we will take 3 or 4 ourselves and subsidies? So probably not, because I don't see the trouble is I don't see there being a lot of other nations ordering them. And that's the problem. Oh, theoretically, the Atlantis is quite a good option for that. For the largest to do. The biggest dry dock we can theoretically build in Canada and Britain. The Atlas is a fairly good one to go with. I have no idea when they might be running another one. I know sales have kept going. I have just had my latest installment of royalties from it, so I can now buy another Chinese dinner for my family. That's traditionally what my royalties have traditionally come in, has been amounts of enough to buy a Chinese takeaway for the family as a treat, or enough to buy a Calyx. That has been what my royalty checks have reflected when they've come in from that book. I'm still proud of it, and I still think it's a very good book, and really like people buying it. So I can buy another Chinese takeaway. But yeah, it's fun. Hopefully there will be another hardcover soon. So, cool cruiser book. There are 6 more days of this. And the reason I'm bringing this up, this lovely cruiser book, this Naval cruiser book, and link is down below, is you'll know there is a special thing for people who support me and etc. There is a special card you can get which has a World War I cruiser on it, which I'm quite proud of. And B, because I can't believe it, but they're currently not that far away from HMS Hood as a special card. And I think that'd be cool. If you look at all the cards that are coming through as an option, the specials they're actually getting through, that'd be really, really cool. It would be really cool. So, if you're interested in a cruiser book, which is a massive, what I would call tabletop cruiser book, full of pictures and images and all sorts of things, it's $99 if I remember correctly. I think that's it. I'm sure I'll be corrected if I'm wrong about a chat who'll go and check it out. But they are really close to getting to their goal in terms of hood and all sorts of things being there. So if you're interested in it, I highly recommend it. It's a cool looking book. It's a very fun book in terms of what's been put into it. I'd also say keep an eye on Britain at War. They have got a lot of fun things coming through in that publishing network. They have a lot of fun things coming out through that publishing network. It is going to be cool. It is going to be really cool. And that being said, though, so I'm having fun at the moment, if you haven't noticed it, because one of the things that keeps cropping up is people keep talking to me about uncrewed assets. They keep talking to me about various uncrewed assets which are going to be the future. And then I see what's actually working. Meet the Viking. This particular uncrewed asset is last mile logistics. It is last mile logistics. It's about getting supplies forward to infantry units. It's about making sure individual squads have their supplies with them. They're basically reinventing. I don't know if you notice. I'm checking that I'm not calling it by the wrong name. No, yeah. They are basically reinventing the universal carrier. And once you think of that, you cannot unsee it. Okay? Go and look at this vehicle, look at its stats for what it can carry and everything else, and they are basically reinventing the universal carrier. aka the Bren-Kun carrier. That is literally what they are reinventing. And I love it. Don't get me wrong. I think it's a really cool idea to be going with. But I also find it fun that that's what we're doing. This comes back to a lot of the theory I have about drones and uncrewed assets. Is a lot of the duties of things they're going to be fulfilling. A lot of roles they're doing are gaps we've built in our own force structure because we haven't wanted to spend the money, and in peacetime we haven't had to. In peacetime, we have not had to do it. It's fun. And KVG, yeah, no. Look, I realise I know what media and what sources you're picking up from what you're going from, but realistically, again, last 20 miles versus last mile. Last 20 miles it might end up having to do on occasion, but it's not really structured for that. And also, I would say there are other systems coming in to make that area palatable. One of the problems that we've had, and I would again say this is, the reason why NATO is probably proved into, and a lot of nations within NATO have proved very vulnerable to drone systems when they've started looking at them in their doctrine and their policies, is because they're used to operating under uncontested skies. Let's be honest, the Taliban Air Force was not particularly strong in Afghanistan. Even the Iraqi Air Force wasn't really as much of a problem as they should have been on paper. In the second Gulf War, let alone the first Gulf War, they got some amazing feats, but they weren't really as strong as they could have been. And one of the problems you have in Ukraine is it's very much contested airspace. And there are some spaces where it's heavily contested, in which case probably is the last 20 miles. But there are other areas where it's a lot less contested because they're near enough systems which mean it is not as contested. In which case, it's often the last mile. And that's the point. I would argue also that when you start to look at it, you look at the fact that the Israelis have the Torfi system, they have all sorts of systems which they put into place to protect vehicles. And you then look at how many other nations have similar equipment. If you consider most tanks in NATO forces were still using human-controlled and aimed machine guns as their air defense capacity. Up until disturbingly recently. Remember, we're talking about the same NATO which fields some of the most impressive attack helicopters the world has seen. And yet, at no point do they think about, what happens if those attack helicopters are turned on us? Yes, David Blum, basing your entire doctrine on complete air superiority is massively conceited. And I've already mentioned in terms of defensive warships and how there are systems out there which can deal with the mass drone attacks and all these things, 76mm flak shells, all those various systems, there are options. But how many nations actually carry enough of them? And it's not one gun you need. Going, I have one 76mm. That's not enough firepower. Oh, I never thought about that. You probably need 3 or 4. Again, if you want a reality, we are talking about drones coming back and filling in the full spectrum attacks. You have the mass and the high capability attacks at the same time. It's not going to be just, we're dealing a deluge of drones, and then we have a missile attack, and then we have a hypersonic missile attack. It's going to be all of them coming in at once. And that's also what Ukraine is doing to Russia a lot of times, and what Russia is trying to do to Ukraine. They're not going, we're going to be nice. We're going to give a single focus of attack today. We're only going to attack with drones. No. It's full spectrum war all the time. And this is one of the problems with some of the reporting that comes out of Ukraine. Because if you read some of the reporting from Ukraine, it will tell you artillery's amazing and everything else is ignored. Our reporting, drones are everywhere and everything else is ignored. Hypersonics are still dominant and everything else is ignored. And the reality is, it's all of them. It's modern warfare. I'm sorry. There's not going to be a side of, hello, today is the hypersonics only day. We all got that. Both sides understand. Hypersonics only. No, that's not happening. It's not that nice and neat. And this is one of the trouble. A lot of reporting that comes out and affects the design of these vehicles and procurement them is very neat reporting. And that's what a lot of the governments are responding to. And the reality is, war is not neat. War is not neat. For UK, what does this mean? Honestly, for the UK, the only decently sized armoured vehicle we're producing that can produce a full spectrum ground combat vehicle, or something which could sustain, as an uncrewed asset, the last 20-mile logistics, is the Boxer. Okay? The thing that annoys me most is that they've produced a frigating tracked version of the Boxer before they produced a version of the Boxer which doesn't have a human sitting in the front compartment. And this is something which we've got to think about. Lions, don't worry about my blood pressure. According to my heart rate, I'm fine. I'm at 82 beats a minute. And dropping. So my heart rate is certainly not high, so don't worry about it. Floppy so note, yes, the Boxer, the British were part of the original development program of the Boxer. Then we decided to drop from the Boxer program because we had a new idea, and everyone else carried on developing it, and now we bought back into the Boxer. Yes, this is the British, this is British procurement, Ploppy. This is what annoys me so much. So the thing is, if you want, we're already talking about potentially putting an uncrewed gun system in terms of artillery system onto or rather a minimally crewed asset, gun system onto a Boxer, so that they, you know, have basically the driver and a couple of crew and an artillery piece, and there's all sorts of various assets put through as ideas for it. But no one's thought, well, hang on, can we make this into an uncrewed asset? Because here's my mind. Let's say you have a couple of crewed Boxers, or maybe 4 of them, and you have 4 or so uncrewed Boxers, and the uncrewed Boxers can have guns on them, and other weapon systems, maybe missiles. The crewed Boxers carried the people, the ability of the people, and the control systems for the uncrewed assets. And they work as a group. And when you need to move forward, when you need to advance, the uncrewed Boxer goes first. And because they're all Boxers, they all have the same, they have basically the same logistics train. That would make sense to me. That would be something I would be working on developing and investing in. And that's life. $82 is fine for me, Steve. My resting heart rate at the moment is not as my resting heart rate pre-pneumonia was down in the 60s. It's now in the 70s since pneumonia, and that's perfectly normal for pneumonia recovery. So it'll be a couple of years more of a lot of exercise before I'm lower than that. Yeah, pneumonia has a lovely impact on your body. It used to be my resting heart rate was down in the mid-60s, which was fine for my family and our general history. Now it's put on it's usually high 70s, so 82 is not that much of an increase for me. Lovely. And double pneumonia. I highly do not recommend anyone getting double pneumonia. It really doesn't fun in long-term impact. Now, the thing is, again, as Sadoo's point out, but if you do have a Boxer, you might get some people going, oh, do we need crewed Boxers at all? The trouble is, yes, you do. You do. You need to feel someone to control it. And again, the point I keep making about uncrewed assets, and this is the thing which starts to get people into real trouble. Okay. So, why did the British end up going with the Harrier program in terms of developing it for the Navy and Invincible class carriers? The answer is, because whilst you can shoot down aircraft long range with a Sea-Dart missile, you can, when it works, you can't verify your target with a Sea-Dart missile. And in the grey zone of war, or grey zone and conflict, and the areas around conflict, you sometimes want to verify your target before you engage it, because otherwise, who is at fault? Now, if it was a ship shooting down an airliner, it's probably going to be blamed the captain. The buck stops with them. However, if it's a drone being controlled from the UK using rules of engagement which are defined by the government, then you could make an argument that the force commander is the person who gives the order for the engagement. And if that happens to be on that occasion a politician, you could see a politician getting blamed, because there is not an on-scene commander who is therefore the person responsible. So, As long as you as a politician do not want to get the blame when something goes wrong, you need someone who's there in person to make the final call. So you're going to want some crewed assets. I know, that sounds terrible, but that's honestly the reason why how the Royal Navy managed to justify getting their carrier program. That's how afraid certain politicians are for taking responsibility for these things. Oh. Now we get on to GCAP. GCAP. Well, here's the thing about GCAP. You need it. Okay? It's the problem with a lot of these things is you do need to have crewed personnel involved in them, and unless you want to be entirely dependent upon American industrial capacity for next generation aircraft and maintaining viability of air forces, you need to develop and invest your own if you're a NATO nation. And you can't really buy it off China either, because, well, that will create its own kettle of fish in terms of issues. So, your own options. It's not going to be cheap. Okay? I'm sorry. There is this amazing idea which crops up somewhere that somehow procuring the latest cutting-edge weapon systems will be cheap. Or should be cheaper. I never know where this idea comes from. There is always this idea that, yes, something which is designed to end life should be cost-effective. It should be, marginal investment. It's not going to be. It just isn't. And this is a real problem. A real problem in terms of long-term investment is this program has to be funded. And if you want to be part of the construction program for it, if you want to have the ability to jobs in the UK, if you want to have the next generation technologies, if you want to have the development, you need to get involved and you need to fund it. Because you're not going to get it otherwise. If you don't get involved in this, if you're not involved in this, then kiss goodbye to your fighter aviation industry. And the thing is, this will have a lot of spill-off technologies. A lot of technologies which will go into drone programs, a lot of technologies which will go into other systems. So if you develop it for this, it is fine. Now, the thing is, there is a limit when you're doing a combined program in terms of how many nations you want in to coordinate it with politically. There have been actual studies in this, okay, where they've looked at the proportion, the likelihood of a program actually getting completed, and how many nations are actually involved in it. The more you have getting involved, the less likely it is to actually get completed. You have 2 nations, that program is almost certainly going to come to fruition at some point. You have 3 or 4, there are issues. But it probably has a good chance. You have more than 5, you're starting to look at a downfall scenario. And everyone has heard. There's been entire newspaper articles, there have been entire columns on the concept of the Treasury wanting to take direct control of GCAP. I can only say if the Treasury do, as I've put in tweets and other discussions on threads and other areas, as well as Twitter itself, I think, or X as it's now apparently supposed to be called, That's basically admitting that the Treasury is a government within a government. The moment the Treasury is directly taking control of procurement programs in other departments, it's a government within a government. Now, people do keep arguing, well, that's because defense can't do procurement. And I sit there and look at them and go, here's the thing. Defense Department can do procurement. It's just, every time there's a new Minister of Defense, they change their minds about things. Every time there's a new government, they change their minds about things. Every time there's a new buzzword in defense, they change their mind about things and want everything to be rearranged and reincorporated. That is what happens. So actually, there's part of me which actually would like Treasury to take over it, because you know what? You actually have changes in Chancellor less often than you do Defence Minister. So at least that's going to cut down on the ministerial changes. And the Chancellor is probably going to take less notice of defence news. So it's probably going to cut down on the buzzword changes. But here is the real thing. Here is the real problem with procurement. And I've been saying this for a long time. Since you got rid of the Third Sea Lord and their equivalents from the Army and the Air Force, who were in charge of procurement for their services at that level, there has been unending issues, because there hasn't existed someone who has the sole responsibility for both overseeing procurement and explaining what they're procuring to the government. That was their job. That is why I believe the Third Sea Lord, etc. posts should be re-established, and procurement should be delegated down to the services responsible. Because then you have someone whose job it is to go into the minister and go, hello sir, yes, you've heard some new things. Well, let me please explain those to you so you can make an informed decision. Or, ma'am, I understand you've heard from journalists and seen these very interesting articles. Now, I can see your point and where you're coming from and why you want to change things, but let me explain and clarify what those articles are missing, so you can make an informed decision. You need someone like that doing that job. GCAP and other crew programs, they're going to matter. There are things which you're going to want to be crewed. I am sorry, but any helicopter which is carrying people, they are probably going to want a crewed pilot for it. Now, we might talk about special operations. They might special forces might be different. But in my own experience, if I was getting into a helicopter where I know there is such a thing as the Jesus Bolt, which if it goes, I will bust straight through the pearly gates to defeat the Jesus, and miss St. Peter entirely on the way. I want to see a human up there who's actually controlling it physically. I want to know they're in the same boat as me. If I'm being remote controlled by someone else, my theory goes, well, if we crash, for them it's a nasty moment. For me, it's a terminal experience. I don't want that. I want to know they have the shared experience. I want them to realize these things. So I'm sorry, anything which involves humans being transported is probably going to have a human pilot. You don't get a... Jonathan Moon, no. When the Jesus Bolt goes, you don't get a chance to pray. There is no praying when the Jesus Bolt goes. You're gone. You're through. Okay? You have to remember. That is the reality of it. With that being said, though, there is another problem for this. Okay? And I have often told you, if you can Google it, you can hit it. if I can find its location by a Google search, I can target weapons on it. That is the reality of the modern world. This is an advantage which ships have. Their location, once they're out at sea, is rarely Googleable. It usually requires a lot more effort. However, here is a small, little, interesting bit of a problem, okay? Because the British have invested in 5th generation aircraft, which is their F-35 program. However, one of the reasons why F-35s weren't able to be deployed upon the recent carrier deployment was because they were deployed to Cyprus, where there were really not long-term maintenance facilities set up for them. Which meant that when they came back, they needed a whole lot of maintenance done. Which meant they couldn't be deployed to the carrier. Because if they'd been deployed to the carrier, then the carrier would just have had to do the maintenance on them instead of Marham. They still wouldn't have been able to be used. There was literally no point to deploy them to the carrier, because whilst the only free bases which the British operate themselves that are full maintenance capability for those for the F-35Bs are RAF Marham, HMS Queen Elizabeth, and HMS Prince of Wales. The fact is, there is no point deploying aircraft to the carriers when they're just going to sit in there having maintenance done to them. They literally have not done... They've only built one base, which can actually be a full maintenance facility for them and the carriers. Because they had to. So, technically they go, yes, we have 3 airfields which can support these aircraft with full maintenance capabilities. 2 of them are aircraft carriers. That's great. The third one is Marham. Now, we could also go to Lakenheath, which operates F-35As for the US Air Force. So that's got maintenance facilities. So we could claim, well, there's an American base, and Fairford has some facilities. But please note, 2 out of 3 of those land bases are US air bases in the UK. So... yes, to Wayne, you do need more aircraft. The British do need a lot more F-35Bs. Or, potentially, they need to go and have a talk to the Swedes about the Gripen and produce a short takeoff and landing variant of the Gripen. Rapidly. Currently, they're doing a whole scenario, Operation Vixen, to try and procure a UAV system for their carriers. But if that's not viable, then I'm afraid it's going to have to be a case of talk to the Swedes for Gripen, because we're not getting F-35Bs quick enough. And the point is, as I've been making, is that the likelihood of those ground bases being hit is high in any scenario. So, I would say, as part of my defense investment plan would be, I don't know, let's spread the love a little bit. I want all those bases to have a range of air defense facilities at them. The American ones I can leave to the Americans, but the Brits ones need to have some air defenses. They need to have some gun units, and they need to have at least some CAM missile units, Scepter missile units, preferably something else. We keep talking about getting something like Patriot equivalent. We need something. We do. We cannot... It used to be the idea that we could survive on fighters alone. And fighters would provide the UK with air defense. And yeah, that's a lovely option. But the thing is, the world's changed. Drones, missiles means that there's likely to be more angles of attacks and a wider spread attack, and you're probably going to need some other air defense so you can have more layers. And the fact is, you need something. And to answer, Knight, your question of why buy Gripen, as said, if the UAV program doesn't work out, then the only thing to add that to rapidly generate extra aircraft, the only production line which could potentially buy a modernish STOL aircraft which could operate alongside the F-35B on the British carriers would be the Gripen program. And that is Gareth the Brit's idea. If you want to go have a chat with him about that, he has some really good points. This is the point about Gareth. I love spending time with him because whilst we have different starting points in our politics, I must admit we do have different starting points, he has a lot more hope than I have. I'm a lot more cynical than he is, and that's amazing to realise. When you realise I'm more cynical than Gareth the Brit, that's when you start to really worry about me on some level, I think. But he put it forward as a very good point. He said, well, if the UAV system doesn't work, that's your only option, and it is. Because the F-35B program is the most oversubscribed procurement program there is, and Britain keeps delaying its orders. So if we really can't get enough, then the option is the Gripen, and there's quite a lot of British components in the Gripen, so it's going to get a fair return on investment. And it's us who are to blame for not getting F-35B fast enough. But the thing is, that's the reality we've come into. They're not going to let us start a UK production line for F-35s. They are building one in Germany. Germany's already got it. We stupidly didn't petition for that. The maintenance facility's gone to Italy. You know, you start looking at going, Britain was supposed to be a tier 1 partner, and every time it came to, would you like to do this? Oh no, we don't want to invest that money. So it's gone to other people. And then we complain, we haven't got enough return on our investment. Well, guess what? Why? It's a, duh, you don't think. You know, we're already building components for it. Having the maintenance facility or having a production line for it would not be a stupid thing to have set up. And it would work, everyone. It would work. You could. The thing is, you could. The reason it works for the Gripen is the Gripen is small enough compared to the F-35B. You could actually make it work. It's more difficult to put in a larger aircraft in than it is to make a smaller aircraft work. Now, this brings us to this. The Navy to buy 20 uncrewed boats as testbeds for future operations. I love the idea, but we're supposed to be depending on this very shortly, and we are buying uncrewed 20 boats as testbeds. We are buying uncrewed boats as testbeds. Okay, let me put this the other way to you. I understand why they're being bought as testbeds, because frankly, the technologies are not mature enough for us to be buying anything else. This is the most recent press release on the subject. This is the reality. They're not the idea. The system. The people keep talking about the concept. It's not there yet. But people are talking about the concept as if it's a reality. I get people telling me, "Oh no, you don't need to buy those crewed assets. Uncrewed assets are the future." Really? Yeah, because these remote control attack boats go and blow up Russian vessels from Ukraine. Okay. Do they need to carry out towed sonar array operations yet? Well, no. They haven't got that one working. Okay. How do they operate in a scenario where they're getting attacked by aircraft? Well, if they are found at sea by helicopters, they do tend to get massacred. Okay. Alright. And how do they operate in the waves of the North Atlantic, South Atlantic, or the Pacific, or Indian Ocean, the big, big oceans? Well, they haven't really tried them out in those waters yet. That becomes the problems. You see, the thing is, I don't disagree that uncrewed maritime assets are a future. They are going to be part of the future naval force. As I keep pointing out and when I'm structuring, I go, you're basically going to have the crewed asset, you're going to have the uncrewed assets around it, as each ship becomes its own task group. That's what the modern force, the future force is going to look like. That's probably going to be the next 20, 40 years of development. That's what it's going to be. I'm happy with that. That means you're using them as force multiplication assets. You're using them as capability generation assets beyond existing force. Not force replacement assets. And the thing is, when we start to look at even the government's own plans for the Atlantic Bastion, very quickly you notice the Type 26s and the submarines and the Type 93 UUVs are up here in the high threat area. And then the USVs, the uncrewed surface vessels, along with other assets to control them, are in the Atlantic net area. And there are more Type 26s around here to control them as well. So you're talking about crewed, uncrewed assets working together. And the thing is, again, once we start looking at these, we keep talking, when we're talking about the uncrewed assets, we tend to be talking about extra large uncrewed undersea vessels, which are big. That's one of the AUKUS programs. A lot of the sensor platforms, I have to admit, for the uncrewed surface vessels, are small and cheap. But if you want them to do the jobs you're asking to do, they're not going to be that small and cheap. They're not. Now, if anyone's looked up recently, the Royal Navy currently has a vessel called the Patrick Blackett, which is roughly 300 tons in displacement, which is being used as a testbed for a lot of the uncrewed assets and for quantum navigation. It is named for a Nobel Prize winning physicist who was the director of operational research at the in the Royal Navy during World War II. Now, that's a good person to name a vessel from. Again, by the way, the Patrick Blackett was built by Damen Shipyards in Rochheim. It wasn't built in the UK. Why? Well, no shipyard would build a one-off vessel for them. The reason is that Damen Yards are churning out a lot of vessels like the Patrick Blackett. So one extra fitted to the Royal Navy needs was no price for them. For other yards, it would mean a one-off ship, and it wasn't big enough or useful enough for that. And one of the lessons that's coming out of it is this is a useful asset. It's a test bed. It is not that big and not able to carry enough for operational needs. What am I talking about? Well, her working deck has a capacity of only 100 tons and can secure only 2 TEU containers, providing them with electrical power, cooling water, and data. She also has a single knuckle boom crane. The thing is, that's not enough for operational needs. And once you start talking about something carrying 6 to 8 TEUs, once you start talking about them having a range of not more than 3,000 nautical miles at 20 knots, once you start talking about them potentially having the crew capacity to support that, because once you're getting onto a larger vessel, you're going to need to occasionally fix things at sea, which means you're going to need to have a helicopter platform, but a helicopter to land on, Because they won't be just the crew hopping off and on. There'll be people hopping on, off and on with spare parts, tools, those sort of things, which they might not have on the vessel, so they will need to be able to take them in and on with them. And possibly need to sustain life for a couple of nights while they're fixing stuff. So you're going to need to have some cooking facilities. Basically, these assets are going to be optionally crewed rather than uncrewed, once we're talking about the reality of them. They're going to need some form of toilet facilities. They're going to need some form of showering facilities, because no one wants to be doing maintenance not being able to shower occasionally. And yes, you're probably looking at adapted oil rig support ships as the basis of your idea, and that is what Patrick Blackett, I think, is. She's an adapted small one. But this is the point. There are lots of options out there, and they're worthwhile looking into. But also, as well as that, why do you need the crewed assets with them? Well, because if you want to operate at sea, again, you're going to need communications facilities. You're either going to need satellite comms, which can provide you communications in pretty much any weathers these days. We can keep SATCOMs going in pretty much any weather, so we can do command and control in storms and these things. It's sometimes a bit patchy, but most of the time it'll work. The other option people keep talking about is, well, how about we use drones? We use a communications drone. Now, the problem with a communications drone, and I would just like to point this out, is have been developing for many years. Many nations have developed anti-radiation missiles. Okay? They've been around a long time. The reason we've been moving up to satellites is because they are further away and therefore slightly more difficult. It's more expensive to find the systems to take them out at the moment. At the moment, please note I clarified with the at the moment. I know there are lots of things on paper which can do it, and I know there are some things which in existence can do it, but there aren't many of them. There aren't enough SM-3 missiles, for example. Now, the problem with communications drones is they're going to be flying in the region of the Earth where they are interceptable by anti-radiation missiles. And as a communications drone, they are, by definition, kind of like an AWACS. If they are functioning, they're going to be loud in terms of radiation. There is going to be a lot of data going off them. That becomes a problem. Now, again, please note, that is not a reason against doing it. That is a factor in it. That means peacetime, this is going to be a viable system and is going to work. In wartime, what do you have to defend that drone? Is it going to have to carry it? It's probably going to have to carry its own systems to defend itself. And if it has to shut off its transmission, there's got to be another drone ready to take over, be it up there as well. This is the problem which we're going to be talking about. Okay? So you want to do that, that's fine. But you're going to have to invest and think it through. Not just go, new tech, that's going to work. Because it might not. Now, crewed vehicles. Believe it or not, I like the Charlie 3. I think it's a nice idea to get it in. And frankly, the lessons of the Ukrainian war have been tanks are not outdated. Tanks are still useful. Even in drone-infested environments, tanks can still be very, very useful and very, very capable assets. You still need them. In fact, most lessons of the Ukrainian war have been drones have not so much replaced or made things extinct as they have added another dimension onto their operation and capabilities. Because, let's say you have a tank hunting in the enemy vehicles. You have drone up that can tell tank where the enemy is. Tank artillery can do very precise fire with drone guidance. It's one of those interesting things when you start talking about it is, should we bring back the old designation of spotting? If we consider again the swordfish, the fairy swordfish, it was a torpedo spotter reconnaissance. It was a TSR. Torpedo was its strike designation. It could be, which also meant it could also act as a bomber. Spotter. Spotter duty was what HMS Warspite's fairy swordfish was doing when Warspite was going up in the fjords in Narvik. Literally, she was flying up there to go, "Ooh, I see the enemy! The enemy are here! Oh, goody!" There's a poor German destroyer which literally thinks, "I'm in a great ambush position." Doesn't realise it's been spotted by a swordfish over there, far over its head. And as it's waiting, the British ships come round the corner and every single gun is loaded and bearing on it and booms before it can manoeuvre to engage. And that's the reality of it. Okay? Crewed vehicles. They're going to be part of it. But are they going to be more heavily armoured? Well, there's a level at which you can only armour something so much and it still be able to be mobile on the battlefield. That is a problem. Do you want to be air transportable? The other option is you make it part of a crewed, uncrewed package. So for every crewed vehicle, you have uncrewed ones. And maybe some of them carrying missiles. Some of them, all the vehicles possibly carrying a sort of something like a turfy system, something like that to defend themselves against attack. But also, maybe one of them is a mobile air defense asset. Again, we talked earlier about 4 crewed assets with 4 uncrewed assets. Well, it could be the crewed assets carry AA systems, or guns-orientated weapon systems oriented around air defense and long-range bombardment, and the uncrewed assets carry the direct engagement weapons. And yes, I know, Grant Waller, it's about like people say airborne forces are outdated. I have to say myself, you do have a choice. You can either drop into the middle territory surrounded by the enemy and have to fight your way out, or you can charge up a beach which could be defended. That is your choices for assault operations. Either way. This is what we're talking about, though. What we're looking at realistically is a crewed-uncrewed partnership, where the uncrewed assets are going to provide the force multipliers and going to provide some of the force survivability by being in the higher risk positions. Is it higher risk to be the combat vehicle doing direct engagement? It more than likely is. The vehicle doing indirect engagement and carrying air defense can sit back, lob missiles, use its systems to deal with enemy aircraft coming in, those sort of things. The vehicle doing direct engagement is going to be directly attackable. And that's the point. Lots of vehicles are going to have to be filtered with these systems. And this is going to add to the expense of them. Okay? This is one of the reasons why ships, aircraft, tanks, drones get more expensive. It's because the threats multiplying, the systems you have to defend against multiply. Okay? When I'm asked why is a ship these days as expensive as it is, I go, look at the weapon systems that it has to carry. And one of the problems we have is that there is a really weird period post-Cold War where everyone's minimally arming their ships and going, that's enough, because it's war's a choice, so we can do it. If you want proof of that, look at how many ships carry 48 VLS as their missiles. 48 VLS. Doesn't matter, air defense, what role, that's what they carry. And then you remember, hang on, standard practice in NATO is to fire 2 missiles per target, right? So if you're loaded with 48 VLS, even if you have decided to designate 16 of those to carrying 64 between them short-range missiles, let's say ESSM or Quad-Pac Cam, and 32 to carrying longer-range missiles, then your engagement, cumulatively, if you engage 2 targets per one missile per for every engagement with 2 missiles, as is practice, well, you get 48 engagements. Think about it. You are carrying 96 missiles. You get 48 engagements. So that's 48 missiles coming in. That's 48 large drones. That's 48 enemy aircraft, or any combination thereof, up to 48, and then you're out of missiles. Who, in their right mind, thinks that's enough when you cannot rearm at sea? Who? Then we start talking about artillery stockpiles, weapons stockpiles, and people go, oh, we only have enough for 48 hours or 24 hours or a week of combat to survive. I'd be surprised if we have that many. Because here's the other dirty little secret. In a real war scenario, do you fire or not fire if you think there's something there? In the scenarios we've had recently where we've been facing enemy drones and, issues in the Red Sea, etc., that's been wearing enough on our forces and our capabilities. But yeah. The reality of warfighting? And, Bijan, we need megawatt lasers. Here's the thing. We've been trying to develop lasers and railguns for a long time, and they will probably come into service. But if they do, they're going to require a huge amount of power, and the odds are the Americans going away with the nuclear-powered battleship is potentially the only way, medium term, we can get them into service. Because of power generation and power need. Because usually someone goes, well, we have capacitors, and so we can store up the power. That's great. How long is it going to take you to recharge the capacitors? And run the ship. Either way, you're probably talking about extra gas turbines. As said, when I looked at the battleship, I thought it was gas and nuclear powered. Why? Because it probably needs a nuclear power supply for its base operations, and it probably needs a gas turbine to be turned on to guarantee it's going to have enough juice ready and raring to go when it needs to charge up when it needs to keep its railguns and its lasers going. And the thing is, do you want to know the worst thing about that 48 number, by the way? It comes from NFR 90. It comes from the joint studies coming out of the Cold War. And it was based on how long they thought a Cold War would go hot before it went nuclear. That's it. So before people go, it's the European navies. No, the US Navy was involved in it as well. The entire NATO, that's where the 48 comes from. It comes from NF 90. And this is also, I would have to say, the electrical reason is why I think probably the 76mm and various other weapon systems like that will be got back to. Why I'm fairly certain we're going to see some very heavy machine guns started to be placed on various vehicles again. Probably with some sort of control system to make them more accurate. With that being said, though, it's time for it's time again for questions, and I'll be looking through the questions. But yeah, Hopefully I ticked all the way, to the end where I got there. Right, before I start on these, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to grab some more iron brew. I have 2 in there. I have 2 in there. That's empty. Oh, I have 2 here as well. I have 6 bottles of iron brew and I didn't realise it. That's not a bad thing, is it? Forgetting how much iron brew I have in stock. I might be buying too much of you. The fact that I'm ordering 2 bottles with every Morrison's order I do suggests I've done too many Morrison's orders. Okay. Right. Iron brew it is. Iron brew addiction seek help. We're long past the point at which any help would do. There is no help for this level of addiction. As my GP says whenever he's drawing my blood, I found some red stuff in your brew, Alex. Ploppy, to be fair, not just the third battle, Alec. First and second battles as well. One of the things I fun is probably the wrong word to use, but I most enjoyed about visiting Narvik was I went to the memorials for the Norwegian ships, and I was really happy to see them because they deserve memorials. They deserve to be remembered. Yeah, Calmos, I know the Lynx has a stabilized hunter-killer machine gun. I'd like to see more vehicles with that sort of system. Okay, Rajmodi. Any capability info on new Indian nuclear missile subs, as 3rd and 4th is bigger than the Ariane class? Interestingly enough, I think they are probably getting something. They're getting something better. They're improving it. But I think at the moment they're not really discussing it in depth. My suspicion is they're going for more missile capacity. My suspicion is that they're going for greater deterrence capability, but because also it's considered a survivable part of it. That's the thing. The Arians and the S5s, I think, are the ones that are coming out of them. The Arians are listed as having... Well, Ariant herself has 4 tubes. The Aridam subclass has 8 tubes, so they double the tube numbers. And if I'm not mistaken, the ones which are coming next are armed with 12 tubes. Now, they'll be hopefully able to take the K6. Now, the K6 is an interesting missile system. If for those who don't know, India is the other nation which are developing their own ballistic missiles. And one interesting conversations I had with some of the other with someone not that long ago was we keep looking at comparing the French and the American ballistic missile system. No one talks about the K6 program which the Indians are working on. Whenever they talk about trying alternatives, immediately it goes to the French. The K6 actually looks a very good system. Okay. Now, that could be a really weird scenario if you ended up going down that route. But if you have a look at the K6 and the Trident D5-2, I think it is. It's the Trident D5 blah. And you have a look at their specs and their sizings. the fact is, the K6 is not as far off it. It's not. It's not the same as it in any. But it's not as far off it as some people might like to think. At full loads, the K6 can apparently do 10,000 kilometers, and at full load, the operational range of the Trident is officially listed at 7,600 kilometers. Officially listed. When they're only carrying 4 warheads, it could be 11,500 kilometers. Now, the interesting thing about the Trident is it's 30 and nearly 14 meters in length, and it's roughly a little over 2 meters in diameter. The K6 is a little over 12 meters in length and a little over 2 meters in diameter. So, yeah. K6 is an interesting system. Indians are doing some very interesting developments about their indigenous organic capability, and they have my appreciation for that. But it gets forgotten. It gets forgotten. Going toward a science sector. There is a Ukrainian combat drone that is unmanned TKS tanket from World War II. Yeah, I've heard about that. It's pretty cool. And look, thoughts on Vard's Vigilance Corvette design for the new Canadian Corvette program? I think you've asked this before. The reason they're getting 57mm is they've got 57mm in service, and honestly, as much as I prefer them to have the 76, if they've got the 57mm in service and it's viable, you might as well go it. But it's a 3-pounder versus a 6-pounder. That's it. Alright, no. It's 6-pounder versus 9-pounder, I think. Yeah. Try to remember. I think the 76mm is the 9-pounder from memory, and the 57mm is the 6-pounder. Yeah. Sorry, I got them wrong way around at the beginning. Ploppy Sonic, is there a possibility of setting up drone autonomous systems in universities like the University Air Squadron? Yes, there is, and again, I would be doing that. I would be in a nice way. The easiest way to multiply capabilities is to go where the people are interested in these things already, and the amount of engineering departments in the country who are already interested in drone and autonomous systems. I'd start working with them. I'd start getting them involved. The one problem I would say is some UK universities. Oh, how's this gonna? This is gonna could come. Okay. Some UK universities are more set up for having such organisations involved in them than others on an administrative and logistical level. Some universities are good at external partnerships. Some are not. I want that to be clarified before anyone starts reading politics or anything into this. No, it's university organisation. And this is one of the troubles with doing that sort of program, is it doesn't just depend upon the government wanting to, it depends on universities actually being able to do it. Some of them trying to outsource the running of such link-ups to departments and all sorts of things, and realistically that sort of program needs to be run through the central university with a lot of senior people in the university involved, which means they need to structure and think about it that way. Knight 6831. If Saab JS-39 Grem gets used on Quiddler's class, wouldn't you have the same problem that the compromised Su-33 Flanker D and Mika? Not really, because... Okay. So, let me clarify what was meant as it. Basically, you outsource the air defense role to the Gripen. So the Gripen STOL aircraft get used as the air defense aircraft, providing the cap. And that allows the F-35Bs to concentrate on the strike. And that makes sense if you don't have UAVs to act as a wingman, to multiply the force structure. Okay? That's what I was talking about. And that's a scenario where you basically... Because the reason the carriers were designed around being able to take 2 to 3 squadrons of aircraft, right? Of strike aircraft. Is you pretty much would have one rolled for air defense of the battle group, and one rolled for strike, and one rolled to fill in gaps and help out between those other two. Under this scenario, you basically have Gripen Squadron, your air defense, 35Bs, your strike, and UAV Squadron, your supporting. When the UAV squadron comes into service. Or F-35B if you can. Now, it's going to make a stores issue, which means those store ships are going to be even more important than they are now, but it is a viable option if you need to have more airframes. Because, I'm sorry, we have to wait for the F-35B because that is the perfect aircraft, but that means we only have X number of airframes available, and so we do not have enough aircraft for a full carrier air group, is not a smart way to run a navy. If you have the Gripen and you're able to order enough of them quickly enough that you can go, oh, we have 2x aircraft, or 2x number of airframes available, that makes it a lot more viable. The question of whether it be politically capable is a wholly different matter, but this is the point. This is what I would do a defence investment plan, not what Keir Starmer and the current lot doing the defence investment plan seems to be. They seem to be more concerned with making a defence investment plan that doesn't go over more than £13.5 billion than they do with actually fulfilling the criteria which I set out at the beginning. And I mean that in the nicest way, because the only firm thing I've seen about the Defence Investment Plan is the money. I haven't seen anything of what it's actually supposed to be doing firmly. And that's always a problem, because if your firm point you're starting from is the budget, not what you're doing, then you've worked it out the wrong way round. What you should do is work out what you need to do, bring in a budget and go, right, so what do we really need to do? What do we want to do? Or rather, what do we have to do? What do we need to do? And what do we want to do? And the first thing you cut is want. Then you work out which of your needs are most essential, and you never cut the have to do's. If you're sensible. Joe Fredericks, how effective will future APS on tanks be against FPV drones? And will more vehicles than there's tanks be fitted with APS in future? So far from what I've seen at the various shows I've been to and the various discussions I have, is that APS is certainly working on it. The companies involved in APS are working on it, and we'll see. I don't think there's ever going to be a scenario where you go, the FPV drones have no chance, because the APS will always take them out. But it's also not going to be a scenario where the FPV drones will always get through, if that makes sense. I think it's going to be a fight, and that's the reality. Bob's modelling. There's no such thing as the daft question. There's a question which is only of the questions which weren't asked. Would there be any benefit to repurposing oil rigs and some of the observation lookout posts, or would they be a problem? The trouble is defending them. The trouble is with oil rigs is they're a fixed location, and whilst you can move them limitedly, they don't really move that fast. And that's the problem. They're going to be hard to resupply in a wartime, and protecting them. And it's one of the things. Let's put it this way. Okay, so the moment I start talking about this, people usually talk about using unmanned vessels to resupply ships at sea. And I go, who's going to escort those unmanned vessels, uncrewed vessels? And that's when you get into problems. Because let's say I decide I'm going to resupport my Type 45s and make them work better by giving them VLS, of giving them uncrewed vessels which are loaded with VLS. So they increase their missile capacity. Okay, that's fine. What happens when they need to be resupplied, when those vessels run out? Oh, well, they're going to take themselves home and be resupplied. Okay, what happens if someone sinks them en route? Think about it. When is the easiest time to take out those vessels? When they are part of the task group? Or when they are soldering off home to rearm? Or they are soldering out, armed up? So you're going to have to escort them. Which means you're going to need more vessels to escort the uncrewed vessels backwards and forwards. And that's the fun part. That's the fun part where someone like me is basically going, so how do you do this? Because this is the point. The first 5 words of a statement, if you can get 5 words or less, these uncrewed assets will provide for the extra VLS capacity. Uncrewed assets provide extra VLS capacity. That's great. How do they get rearmed? How do they get resupplied? Oh, we're just going to have more of them. They're going to keep going. How are they going to be protected on the way in and way out? That's the problem. And this is the often problem with these great ideas when they come out. They got these great ideas. These are going to solve all our problems. Okay, it's the next 5 words. And the 5 words after that and the 5 words after that which are going to get them into trouble. And if you want to add torpedoes, add sonar to the to the uncrewed vessels, you can do. But then you're going to need someone to coordinate and escort that. And yes, you might as well, probably more sensible to just make sure that it's probably cheaper in the end to actually have built the destroyers with enough space for enough VLS. Now, are we seeing a return of the do they assume it will go nuclear within a few days mentality? No, not yet. We aren't seeing. Basically, the assuming it will go nuclear within a couple of days is pretty much one of the greatest ways that the Treasury has ever found for saving money. And the fact that so many different governments jumped onto it was just amazing. Even the Soviet government went on to it will go nuclear very quickly and it will be able to save money. You don't have to. You think about it. You think about all the munitions you don't have to buy and stockpile if you're not going to need them after a couple of days. You think about all the money you can save. You don't have to worry about convoying ships across the ocean. So you don't have to have enough frigates for it, enough destroyers to escort them. You don't have to have carriers to fight a battle in the Middle Atlantic, because there's no battle in the Middle Atlantic, because it's going to go nuclear. You think about all the things you don't need to do. That's the thing is, you can trace those ideas back to the 1966 carrier decision, to the 1960s 66 carrier decision. You can go all those things back. You can go really far back in British foreign policy and British procurement policy, and you can find the idea was going to be over in a couple of days. It's been there for a long, long time. Joe Fredericks, speaking of that nuclear SLBM programs, I wonder why no one is talking about North Korea. We are, but we're basically looking at them and going, okay. Because the thing about North Korean technology is it's often interesting, okay? Slightly worrying. I did once speak to an analyst who described North Korea as kind of like the orcs of Warhammer. They believe it and somehow make it so. We're not quite sure sometimes how the stuff works. Sometimes we really don't want to know how it works. But they seem to think it's going to work. And occasionally, scarily enough, it does. Yeah, they have a diesel ballistic missile submarine, which is both weird and wild. It is. I'm also told that it is probably #1 target of anyone should any say at any point in the conflict. I'm fairly certain that there are like at least 3 or 4 nations who have a boat dedicated to watching that thing at all times when it comes out. I think there's probably more boats dedicated to tracking that poor submarine than anything else in the North Korean arsenal. Now, Joel Fredericks, does a procurement plan already exist for replacements for the Trident for the Royal Navy? Nope. That would require money. At the moment, we're going with Trident. Trident is it, and Trident is the only option. We have basically Britain has come with a great idea. Pretty much, we do our nuclear warhead maintenance jointly with France, so we don't have to take the cost of it entirely ourselves. And we do our nuclear missile procurement jointly with the Americans, and procure from a common pool where we all buy a certain number of missiles, and there are occasional missiles which go to sea on American boats, and missiles which go to sea on American missiles which go to sea on British boats, probably from the pool we bought, but they're all each other's. Yeah, our government is interesting. That's sorting out that is a whole conundrum, which is frankly going to take a lot of money. Savage Thompson, what future system do you believe holds the most promise and realistically be activated? Oh, they'll all come on online eventually. That's the thing. The trouble is, in defense, it's sometimes hard to work out what's going to be coming into service in 10 years' time, what's going to be coming into service in 100 years' time. Electronic weaponry, railgun style systems. Okay, this is the thing where, of course, we keep talking about new hotness and lasers and all these things now, but the original railgun theory and physics for it dates back to 1917. Okay? And when we say date back to 1917, it was a Frenchman who actually created a working model in 1917. Those of you thinking railguns are something new and modern, I'm sorry, they're not. Eventually, they might actually enter service. It's nearly 110 years. Don't get me started on lasers, okay? This is the thing. This stuff is not new. It's been around and being discussed for a long, long time. This is one of the reasons why, as a historian, I find it funny when people start to go, oh, but this is brand new. No one's thought of this before. And I'm going, yeah. Which answer do you want? The one which is nice and respects you as a human, or the one which crushes your worldview? People usually pick the one which doesn't crush their worldview. Volunteer per order Southern. Still a shorter development time than cartridge breech loaders. Yeah, that still be. It's again. History is littered. Stafford, as far as oh, hang on. armored combat suits. Not 40k style dreadnought, more the kind of combat suit which you saw in the original books of. Oh, what's that? What are those movies? Where they're killing Starship Troopers. The actual book version of the armored combat suit. Yeah, there's lots of nations working on that sort of idea. Grumwall, no, it's not you can't handle the truth. You can't handle the history. That's it. You can't handle the history. I almost named this channel You Can't Handle the Naval History. And decided I would just go my name, because at the time my students were supposed to find it. That's too long. I'm not going to change it now. But it was almost You Can't Handle the Naval History. Because, yeah. Yeah. Joe Frokes, do you think that sometime in the future someone is going to fund and build the good idea of placing an SLBM on an uncrewed vehicle? Considering I've had that debate already in the last couple of years, and I think I put it to bed, but it's probably going to rear its head again. Yes. Because it was considered the way, well, wouldn't that solve the long-term deployments of this crew? Building enough submarines and having the infrastructure for them to be maintained when they need to be maintained would solve that problem. But, yeah. Ay, caramba. Yeah, the fact is, as you'll always say, someone will be stupid enough for sure. But yeah. Anyway. Last 20 minutes, and then I'm going to go check on things, and then I will do about an hour on Discord if people want to chat there. Thank you again for your support, for liking, sharing, subscribing, helping the channel, and you know, supporting it and making sure it can grow. And thank you to all the people who are members, etc. I don't think you realise, and this is something I say for all my YouTube videos, but for all content creators, not just for me. Patreon, memberships on YouTube, the subscribers on Twitch, they are incredibly important to making these things viable. I am lucky. For me, this channel is about funding my research, and the money coming in is very, very nice, because it means that I can dedicate 2 to 3 days a week now, pretty much to research and writing, and doing the channel stuff as well, but also doing stuff for books and doing the things I want to do without worrying about grant funding. I still have to do consultancy at least 2, sometimes 3 days a week, where that pays my living costs, but, you know, I don't mind. I get to do the stuff I enjoy the rest of the week thanks to you and your support, and making this possible. But for a lot of content creators, a lot of people who do the educational tubing like me, I think we're now called edu-tubers, I have no idea. I call myself a historian. It makes my life a lot easier. It's easily pronounceable. And all the stuff, they are dependent upon your support to make it viable. And thank you for doing that. But it is really, the funding from things like advertisements only start to really make things doable quite late in the when you're quite high up. Especially in the outside Christmas months when the advertisers don't pay as much for the advertising. It's the memberships, it's the Patreon members, it's the... For me, it's also the Ko-fis. There are some people who love Ko-fi, and I have no objection to it. But you have to remember, when you go to Ko-fi, for me, you are literally buying Iron Brew. And I take you at your word, and I buy Iron Brew of it. So you are not helping the Iron Brew addiction. Okay? You're not hoping it. But I love you. But the thing is, all that really does help people, and thank you to everyone who does that. Thank you for making it possible. Murphy, 423. Is it true that you don't have any anti-ship missiles on your destroyers anymore? We're buying naval strike missiles. We have some are fitted with naval strike missiles, some aren't. But yeah, the harpoons aren't. And one of our problems with the F-35, and this is going to sound strange, Murphy, is that Britain actually has systems which we developed ourselves, which were supposed to be fitted onto the F-35, but currently Lockheed Martin haven't enabled us to do the work to actually integrate them with the F-35. And this is a point of contention for Britain with Lockheed Martin. It's causing a lot of trouble. Because we have our own weapon systems we want to put on. And they basically go, no, we want you to buy the American weapon systems. Well, this is the whole reason we were a tier 1 partner, so we could get our weapon systems integrated. And it's causing backwards and forwards. So, yeah. So the thing is, we do have weapons, but the thing is, they're not necessarily integrated into F-35 because it's a standing fight. Political fight, and that's an issue. But also, we're getting naval strike missile for the destroyers and the frigates. And to be fair, we're also in a program with the French. We're developing a whole new system that hasn't come into service yet. Again, that's being worked on. That's a longer range strike system, but that's I think that's being designed for VLS launch from things like Silver 70. Night Secretary, so why aren't the UAVs basically replacing the retired Buccaneer tankers and the retired Ghana AW along with the Cornell's? Because try and get them working to do it. They might well do it. They might replace tankers in the AW. That's what they might end up doing. But the thing is, they're not here yet. And we're at the beginning testing. We're talking about flying off a UAV from a carrier next year or something like that. And all these things. And we want to do it in 18 months. When you want to have an actual operational squadron, oh, that's going to be a lot longer. That's going to be a lot longer. This is one of the things that people sort of sometimes don't realize is that to get the UAVs that we are speccing for is going to take a lot longer than what the Ukraine's speccing for. Because Ukraine is going for, what the frigate's available, let's put it on now. Because they're in that mindset because they are fighting a war. Most of the Western governments are still in the mindset of, we can procure what we want to procure. And, yeah, thank you to Cheb7. Would it be a good idea for a Baltic bastion similar to the Atlantic, with Poland working together with the Nordic countries? They are working on that. They're working on that sort of bastion approach. But honestly, the Baltic is already going to be pretty much a NATO sea, probably in any conflict. The Russian Baltic force is going to be wiped out. The trouble is going to be being able to use the Baltic. This is the differences. Okay, we can deny Russia the use of the Baltic, but can we make use of the Baltic ourselves? So whereas the Atlantic is about access to the Nile, the Baltic's going to be about being able to use it. Because if you can use the Baltic Sea to move goods and move ships and move equipment around, your forces are going to be far more effective and far more easy to resupply, especially the Baltic nations, than if you can't. So this is why the Swedish are buying the FDI and the Polars are buying the frigates they're doing, etc. These vessels are about providing for not just control the sea, but use of the sea. Because remember, you can deny access, you can deny control of the sea denial, with submarines and mines. You can do that. And air power. You can only make use of the sea if you can get your merchant ships, usually, across that sea. And to do that, you need to control the area at least around those merchant ships, which is why you need surface ships with their air missiles, etc. So this is the reality of what they're looking at. So the Baltic bastion is going to be a slightly different bastion from its point of view. It's going to be far more orientated around things like air defense and being able to secure sea lines of communication. For enemy signal. So basically, the government doesn't want to spend the money. The media wants some sort of Star Wars, and the armed forces just want anything now. Pretty much, that's what we have going on, and that's why I do this channel, because I get to try and hopefully correct that just a little bit. Joe Fredericks, do you think the Royal Navy F-35Bs will procure the AIM 260 in future? Look, pretty much, the British want to try and use the British missile systems and the British air-to-air missile systems. And the thing is, the British have the Meteor and the successors to that planned. So that's the problem. The British want the Meteor to be integrated into it. The Meteor is an excellent system for the British. The British already have the things set up for it. It's listed all consido as pending. And so that's the scenario. The Americans would like the British to buy the American missile system. The British want to buy the British missile system for some reason. Can't think why. And it was the Meteor was originally developed for the UK, from the UK's own staff requirement. It is mostly assembled in the UK. So, no, the British don't want to have the AIM 260. The British want their own missile system on there. And this is one of the problems we have, because people go, well, hang on, no, the F-35B is looking weak because of the missile fit, and the British are going, no, it's not supposed to be weak, it's supposed to have our missiles on it. And again, it is a political issue, but it's also, to an extent, there's almost an argument of, there is almost an argument where the British government could potentially go, but the trouble is it would affect the logistics. So, potentially the British could make the case of, right, if you will not let us, we will find a way for another company to let us fit this to us. But then we probably get cut out of all the logistics. So this is the problem. The F-35B is this great universal logistics system, and system which is supposed to be integrated between all partner and allied nations. It sounds amazing. It's actually a massive trap, as a few of us pointed out at the time. There are problems with that as a scenario. It looks great on paper as a great way of achieving synergy. And I want the F-35B in terms of the capabilities it brings. And there isn't many other options. But the logistics system and everything that's set up is a massive lockout of you. It means Lockheed Martin has an overwhelming whip hand in terms of limiting access of other systems to their F-35B project. And that is the problem. That is also one of the reasons why, honestly, it's going to cause issues. It's going to cause issues. Because it's also, I would also say this is also one of those areas which is starting to cause trouble with not just Britain, but a lot of allies who signed up as part of their program and they paid the money that were supposed to have their weapons integrated and haven't. AIM 120 is the older one. The AIM 260 is the new one. I think the British are... There are all sorts of discussions about what the British F-35s are carrying. I think it's... Yeah. I'm not sure. Are the F-35s? I don't know if... I think... The ASRAM is what the British are going with. I think it's the same system which comes from, yeah. I think the ASRAM is what the British are currently working with. Yeah. Yeah. ASRAM, which is the MBDA one as well. Yeah. Sorry, I was just having to check my Excel spreadsheets to make sure, because there are so many lettered ones and numbered ones, and it just, as a dyslexic, it's fun. It just gets confusing after a while. Night 6 around, is it? The consequences for America, they're already starting to find out, because in Night 6 around, what's the if there's, it's not US, it's basically it's US companies have been going, right, and it's not in our financial interest to integrate these weapons into our programs, because if we do, then there's people who can buy weapons from someone else other than us. Well, the thing is, the consequences for that are, if you look, most in European nations, most NATO allies are currently going buy anything but American if they can at the moment. And that's a problem. When you've got quite a lot of allies who are currently going, well, we would like to buy an American system, but we don't know if we'll be able to integrate our own systems into that American system, or have to buy the entire American club, in which case we're going to destroy our own indigenous capability. We're not going to do it. We're not going to do it. So that is the problem. The consequences are, especially when those nations signed up to do so, on the basis that those weapons would be integrated. And there are things either way. The nicest way. Please don't think it's a one-sided system, because there are also problems with some of the European companies and each other, and this is one of the realities you have. You either force very strictly your companies to integrate your weapon systems, or you have issues. And the thing is, with some of the American builders, they are like Vickers Armstrong used to be. And don't get me wrong, Vickers Armstrong was great, but in so many ways. But they did like to make a fuss when people wanted to integrate weapon systems which weren't theirs into their ships and their systems. The UK did have AIM-120s on Eurofighters and Sea Harriers, yes. Before they had then you lost the AIM-120. Then you lost the beyond visual range when you had the GR Harriers take over from the Sea Harriers. So you lost the Sea Harrier force with their beyond visual range, and Eurofighters changed over to Meteors. So the British have bought AIM-120 in the past when they didn't have their own domestic production missile. When they had their own missile in production, they would prefer not to buy the American option. Murphy, so if all of us was available to respond to Russian frigate, if it had gone further, didn't have anti-ship missiles installed, now that wouldn't be affected. Oh, honestly, the odds are the Russian frigate would have found itself facing something. I'm not 100% sure what was. There were assets around. I think it'd probably been dealing with dealing with air attack from F-35Bs and other aircraft like that. I think that's what it would have been dealing with, strike package, and yeah. But in the scenario, if that's they force that level of response, that level of military response, that is war between Britain and Russia. If you are sinking a frigate, that is war. And that is a scenario where you end up with a NATO response as well. Because an attack on one is attack on all. And if the Russians had chosen to attack the yacht, maybe they get away with a British vessel which was shadowing them, then they got into trouble. That's war. That's NATO. That's war. That's NATO on Russia war. That's going to be dealing with a lot of units. And it wouldn't be just the British they'd be dealing with. They'd also be dealing with the French in that scenario, and probably a few others as well. Probably the Dutch. The dip has not dropped, so we've just been chatting about what a dip should be. With that being said, I'm going to do this and this, and questions are now closed. Nights ago, everyone, can we assume it's inevitable the FNF maybe one way or another will get UK weapons? That's an interesting question. That is an interesting question. I don't think the British would choose to jailbreak or bust in UK weapons systems onto their 35 software. But I also would say that if the situation called for it, and they had another option, they do probably have the capacity. Sorry. I had paint in my nose, and I haven't been painting in at least 2 weeks. Actually, no. The last time I did painting was before I went to... How the frick do I have white paint in my nose? I'm not gonna... Sorry. My nose is itching. Distracted look at the moment. Why do I have white flecks? Where did I get white paint in my nose from? Sorry. Alright. Distracted. I do apologize. Now, yeah. Oh, question. Why does our Navy need... because our Navy's not that tiny. And because we don't have enough dry dock facilities where we are to maintain the ships we've got. One of the reasons why our Navy looks tiny at the moment is because we don't have the dry docks to maintain the ships we have. So we can't actually operate them at the effectiveness we need. That's it. That's such a thing. It's like going, right then, I have 60 buses, but I can only maintain one at a time. So my fleet of buses is probably going to start breaking down, or 60 fire engines, and I can only maintain one at a time. You need to have more maintenance bays. And proceedings are drawing to close, yes. And also, basically, no one's invested in the, as I talked about, no one's invested in all of the retired dry docks to keep them viable. So actually, it's more expensive to get them back into service than also to build a floating dry dock in some spaces. Take care. I'm not getting into New Zealand fire service. I'm not. I've heard issues. I've got family out there. So, what have we got coming up? Well, next week, next week. Post-Cold War, resurgent Japan, the destroyer navy. I'm looking forward to that. And the week after that is pre-World War I, not from Mahan, the destroyers of the USN prior to World War I. The destroyer navy. For any seaman, you'd think that, but they try and actually get the government to do it. Nice way, try and get the government to invest in any infrastructure. It's almost a nightmare. Anyway, take care, and thank you very much for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you liked the video, please do share, like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. And, well, thank you for your support. And also, as said, I will be in about half an hour, probably. We'll be on Discord for about an hour or so. I can't be on any longer than that, chatting away, because tomorrow morning I have British Telecom turning up to fix the internet. I have the builders turning up to finish the inner wall out there on the garage. And I also have the solar panel people coming around, I think. All at 8 AM tomorrow morning, because apparently they couldn't spread it out through the week despite my attempts. Take care, everyone. Have fun.